phones and pacemaker malfunction due to electromagnetic interference. In the studies, 980 patients were subjected to close contact with cellular phones more than 5,000 times. In no cases did a pacemaker ever fail, but in about 1 out of every 5 exposures, EKGs of the patient's heart rate showed some interference, occasionally resulting in unwanted pacing. Both scientists and cellular phone industry officials characterized the work as a good news study.
We believe that this is a very manageable issue, and we would hope that the public would not be alarmed by this.
We have had nowhere in the world that we know of reports of incidents resulting from the interference. So this is very good news in that we were able to identify a problem before it became a serious public health problem, and we have solutions in sight.
The study concludes that simple, short, and long-term precautions can minimize any health threat to pacemaker wearers.
This is the primary recommendation that we are making today, that again, that people who have pacemakers keep wireless phones about 6 inches away from the pacemakers.
That means that pacemaker wearers shouldn't store the phone in a breast pocket while it's turned on. They should also hold it to the ear opposite the side where the pacemaker is implanted. Long-term recommendations include pushing the pacemaker industry to evaluate new technologies. There are, for instance, some pacemakers now on the market that are immune from electromagnetic interference. That study, by the way, was funded in part by the cellular telephone industry. It was peer-reviewed, however, and the industry had no influence in the study's process or in its findings.
We are never going to be in a position of saying that there is absolutely no risk. The only thing we can do is look for problems and promise the public that if we find them, we're going to solve them.
Carlo says one problem they discovered involved pacemakers. Cell phones can interfere with them if users hold them too close to where the pacemaker is implanted. Research helped them solve the problem.
They are filters that could be placed inside the pacemaker during the manufacturing process that could render the pacemaker immune or resistant to this type of interference.
The scientists attending this conference say they're also studying what they call behavioral health issues related to cellular phone use.
People may suggest that they seem to get more headaches when they use mobile phones than other things, or people perceive that, say, a radio frequency antenna could cause them some illness, so they tend to worry so much about it that they become physically ill.
Scientists say that cellular phone technology is changing so fast that research into health risks must go on indefinitely, because what's fact today.
Okay, the research that we announced today, both of the laboratory studies, will include both continuous wave and pulse wave studies. So we are looking for input with regard to both the analog and the digital, as the questioner mentions. The research program that we have implemented is there to cover not only the current generation of cellular telephones, but to anticipate what the future generation and the future use of cellular phones is going to be in the different frequency ranges, as well as with the pulse waves versus the continuous waves. Our idea here is that this technology is rapidly developing, and that the research program, to be most efficient and effective, has to be abreast of those rapid developments as well. Yes. Good morning, and let me welcome you to this meeting to announce funding of new research on the issue of portable cellular phones and public health. Before we begin, I would like to introduce the other members of the Scientific Advisory Group on Cellular Telephone Research who are with me here today. Dr. Ian Monroe, seated to my left, is an internationally recognized toxicologist with the Canadian research organization CanTox. Dr. Monroe is formerly the director of the Health Protection Branch of Health and Welfare Canada. To my right is Dr. Bill Guy. Dr. Guy, an emeritus professor at the University of Washington in Seattle, is one of the world's leading radio frequency researchers and has pioneered work in the field of radio frequency health effects. The research process we are involved in began in February of this year, when the cellular telephone carriers and manufacturers announced that they would conduct a comprehensive research and evaluation program addressing the question of cellular telephones and public health impact. The industry committed $15 to $25 million over the next 5 years to support the effort. The scientific advisory group, under my direction, was commissioned in April to independently manage the research effort. The primary goal of the scientific advisory group is to develop a research agenda outlining a course of study which will definitively address the question of possible health effects from handheld portable cellular telephones. The scientific advisory group is coordinating this research effort with government agencies, including the Food and Drug Administration. The FDA has informed me that it is the desire of the FDA for our process to lead to a research program capable of yielding significant scientific data that will be helpful to the FDA in establishing public health policy. The keen interest expressed by the FDA further underscores the importance of the work we have underway. Input regarding our research agenda has been diverse and has involved a broad range of scientific opinion and disciplines. In addition to reviewing existing scientific literature pertinent to cellular telephones, we have actively sought the input of scientists from academia, industry, government, and the private sector who are experienced in this area of research. Numerous research meetings, conferences, and symposia have provided a forum for that input. A symposium held in July in Chicago focused on the complicated issues of dosimetry and exposure relating to portable cellular phones. A second symposium held in September in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, sought input from academic and government scientists regarding general research needs. A third symposium, being held in Washington, D.C. this week, will focus on the health effects question. Scientific rigor is the cornerstone of this effort, and as such, peer review is part and parcel to the process. When we began the process in April, a peer review board was established and funded through a blind trust. I am pleased to announce today that the process of peer review within our program will be coordinated independently through the Harvard University Center for Risk Analysis. Details are now being worked out for expansion of the peer review board under the direction of Dr. John Graham of Harvard, and for critical and independent scientific peer review of all proposals received and data generated under our research program. I am also pleased to announce today the commissioning of a series of initial studies, or Phase 1 studies, on possible health effects from handheld cellular phones. As we have moved forward in gathering input into this research process, we have consulted with a wide range of academic, government, and industry scientists. The studies we are announcing today are in the areas where there is a general consensus that more scientific work needs to be done. We have now set about doing that work. We expect our overall research agenda to go to peer review in early January 1994. After that peer review process is completed and the research agenda is finalized, additional requests for research proposals will be issued. Today we are announcing specific dosimetry, epidemiology, and laboratory studies. Dosimetry studies are necessary to quantify or measure human exposure to radio frequency waves. Dr. C.K. Cho of the City of Hope National Medical Center in California and Dr. Om Gandhi of the University of Utah will conduct a series of dosimetry studies, including, number one, a determination of the time average of the specific absorption rate, or SAR, for the various exposure times for actual cellular telephone usage. And number two, the determination of which of the commonly used dosimetry models are most appropriate for the evaluation of exposures to cellular telephones. Laboratory measurements will be linked to actual patterns of portable telephone usage to assess human exposure. I am pleased that Dr. Cho, a top researcher in this field, is with us today. Dr. Cho, would you please stand to be recognized? We are also pleased to announce the commissioning of a large-scale epidemiology study to evaluate the possible impact of exposure to radio frequency waves on health. The epidemiology work will be conducted under the direction of Dr. Kenneth Rothman and Dr. Nancy Dreyer of Epidemiology Resources in Newton, Massachusetts. Doctors Rothman and Dreyer, internationally recognized epidemiologists, will evaluate cohorts or groups of portable cellular telephone users in several parts of the United States to compare their health with people who do not use portable cellular telephones. I am pleased that Dr. Dreyer is with us today also. Dr. Dreyer, would you please stand to be recognized? Finally, we are today asking for proposals from qualified scientists to evaluate possible health effects relevant to radio frequency waves. We are specifically requesting proposals for in vivo and in vitro laboratory studies examining possible genetic effects of typical exposures from cellular telephones. We are interested in studies addressing the frequency bands and power levels approved by the Federal Communications Commission for these types of communication systems. These include continuous waves and pulse waves in the frequency bands of 800 to 900 megahertz and 1850 to 2200 megahertz. In addition, we seek proposals for concept papers critically evaluating the relevance of experimental tumor promotion studies to human health risk assessment for radio frequencies. That is the completion of my prepared remarks, and before I take questions, I'd like to show you what we have in the press kit. In addition to our press release, we have one-page biographies on the Dr. Dreyer and Dr. Cho, who will be conducting two of the research elements of our program. We also have bios on myself and the other members of the scientific advisory group, and most importantly, there is a one-page description of information for investigators interested in submitting proposals for these laboratory studies. So this is essentially the initial announcement of the request for proposals. This time, I'd like to take any questions you might have. Yes. Okay. The group that is putting up the money is a group of both the cellular phone manufacturers, the cellular telephone carriers, and the groups of companies that build the cellular telephone infrastructure, in other words, the cells and whatnot to transmit the waves. These three somewhat distinct industry groups pooled committed funds to sponsor the research effort. Now, the question of is this enough money has to do with what we find as we move forward. And it's the industry folks have reassured me that there will be adequate funds to do what is necessary to answer the question. So in a lot of ways, the 25 million may be an arbitrary number. The point is that the industry has committed what is necessary to address the questions. Yes.